written and created by Sad Girl Productions. The following content is for informational, educational, and documentary purposes only. Sad Girl Productions does not condone, promote, or encourage any form of criminal activity, violence, or gang affiliation. All individuals discussed are presumed innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. Portions of this narrative are based on public records, news reports by veteran journalists such as Kim Bolan, and official police briefings. Viewer discretion is advised. Bhupinder Singh Johal, better known on the streets as Bindy, was arguably one of the very first notoriously known Punjabi gangsters in Canada before social media existed. He became one of the very first Indo-Canadian gangsters to be covered by media, frequently appearing across TV screens in the Lower Mainland. To a generation of South Asian youth in Surrey and Richmond, he was a middle finger to a world that wanted them silent. As he stood before news cameras in 1994, he would utter the words that would later define his legacy. "I'm still around, bitch." During the rant, he wasn't just threatening a rival, he was claiming a city. 20 years after the single bullet at the Palladium, the music has stopped and the club is long closed. But the legend of Bindy Johal refuses to die. Bindy arrived in Canada at age 4. Throughout his elementary years, he was the classic immigrant success story. He was academically gifted and, by all accounts, a well-behaved kid. To understand the man Bindy Johal eventually became, you have to look at the kid who was once the pride of his parents. He wasn't a born criminal. He was an honor roll student who was exceptionally bright, but he was growing up in an East Van environment where being smart wasn't enough to stay safe. By the time he reached junior high school, he was just another kid trying to navigate the complex social hierarchy of East Vancouver. One of his old teachers at Sir Charles Tupper, Rob Sandhu, famously noted that in grade 8, Bindy showed no signs of the violence that would later define him. In the mid-90s, if you were a brown kid in the Lower Mainland, you basically lived in two worlds. In one, you were expected to be the model minority, a quiet student and the sons of hard-working immigrant parents. Most kids in the Sikh community of the Lower Mainland were expected to wear what's known as a dastar, or better known as a turban, to cover their uncut hair as a cultural symbol of honor and self-respect. Many of them were proud of their heritage and their families. But in Canada at the time, this made them a target for bullying, and most of the time you had to take the abuse. But in the other world, there was Bhupinder Singh Johal. Bindy's story isn't a simple rise and fall. It's a paradox. He was a man who allegedly put racists on stretchers to protect his community. For the kids growing up in Surrey and Richmond, their identity was under constant attack. They were proud of their roots, but they were exhausted by the bullies who targeted them for their turbans or the color of their skin. They were caught in a vice, the expectations of a traditional home and the reality of a hostile street. The streets of Vancouver didn't always respect their cultural dignity. Bindy Johal was an example of someone who walked a path that was a total departure from the values of his community. He took the spiritual resilience of his parents, and he brought it to the cold, hard lifestyle of the street. He was a man who saw the racism directed at his people and decided to strike back with a violence that shocked everyone, including his own community. Just like many Caucasian youth looked up to and followed Jonathan Bacon, many Indo-Canadian kids would idolize Bindy Johal in the same manner. He eventually became a neighborhood celebrity to some, and somewhat of a local hero. He was well respected for what he stood for. He was one of the first people in his area to refuse to take the abuse from the white kids in the community. But in trading his heritage for the life of a drug kingpin, Bindy didn't just fight off the racists. He brought a war home to the very streets his community worked so hard to build. Teachers at Sir Charles Tupper Secondary describe him as a split personality. On paper, Bhupinder Johal is a top-tier student with a promising future in higher education, but in the hallways, he was a bit of a gangster. Friends say that when he was around 17 years old, he had become a shield for other South Asian students, often being the first to throw a punch when racial slurs were heard. While his parents saw a son destined for university, The Vancouver police were beginning to see a name that kept appearing in reports of street-level scuffles. Bindy realized early on that his intellect wouldn't stop a group of white kids from jumping him, so he began to cultivate a hard exterior. He started working out obsessively and made a conscious decision he would never be a victim. This is where the protector myth started. He would step in to defend other kids who were being bullied, but he did it with a level of violence that worried the school administration. By grade 12, Bindy was living a double life. He was still pulling high grades, but his lack of respect for authority was reaching a boiling point. He had zero patience for teachers or administrators, and he felt they didn't understand the reality happening on the streets. The legend goes that the vice principal called Bindy into the office to discuss his attitude and alleged gang affiliations. Bindy felt the administrator was talking down to him, treating him like a thug rather than a student. According to the rumors, Bindy didn't just argue. He allegedly launched a brutal physical assault, reportedly kicking the vice principal so hard he required emergency surgery. That was the point of no return. The honor roll student died that day, and the gangster was born in the eyes of the law. The act got him expelled, and he officially became a former Tupper student. His family moved him to Richmond, hoping a change of scenery would save him. He attended McNair Secondary, but the damage was done. The system now viewed him as a violent offender. Within months, he was arrested for smashing car windows in the school parking lot and got into a bar fight where he allegedly used a broken bottle as a weapon. This is the villain origin story that isn't really a villain story. It's a story of a kid who felt he had to become a monster to survive the environment he was in. To understand how Bindy went from a kid in a jail cell to one of the most feared gangsters in BC, we have to take a good look at the Dosanjh era. It was the birth of a new kind of power structure in the Lower Mainland. In the late 80s and early 90s, the Punjabi Mafia wasn't a formal organization, it was a loose collection of crews. At the top were Ron and Jimmy Dosanjh. They were the blueprint. Ron was the sophisticated businessman who stayed behind the scenes while Jimmy was the muscle of the organization. In the early 1990s, Ranjit Dosanjh was a central figure in Vancouver's social and political landscape. He operated with a level of community influence that made his alleged lifestyle choices particularly shocking for the average person living in the Lower Mainland. The Seattle Times reported that Ron Dosanjh was once the president of the Vancouver branch of the International Sikh Youth Federation. Unlike many of his contemporaries who stayed in the shadows, it's said that Ron Dosanjh held a prominent public role in the early 90s. But he is most commonly described in public reporting as a Vancouver-area Indo-Canadian gangster. Despite the allegations against him, he was said to be an active participant within the Orthodox Sikh community, often seen at local gurdwaras and participating in community events. He is widely remembered for his highly public feud between him and Bindy Johal. During this period, there was a changing of the guard in the back alleys of Fraser Street. The old-school biker gangs and European syndicates were finding themselves squeezed by a younger, equally aggressive force. Leading the charge were the Dosanjh brothers, but it was one of their newest recruits that had police worried. Bhupinder Johal was barely out of high school and had already been sporting a reputation for unhinged violence. These personality traits helped him get recognized in the underworld, and he later reportedly joined the Dosanjh crew. Sources say Johal isn't just a soldier. He was a student of the game, learning how to turn street-level chaos into a multi-million-dollar cocaine empire. When Bindy joined the Dosanjhs, he didn't look like a traditional gangster from the city. He was athletic, well-spoken, and sharp. Because he had cut his hair and didn't wear a turban, he could move through white spaces, posh nightclubs, high-end car dealerships, without immediately drawing the immigrant profile that the police were watching. According to sources, he started as a high-level debt collector. If someone owed the Dosanjhs money, Bindy was the one sent to explain the consequences. He didn't just use a gun, he used psychological terror. He would find out where people lived, where their kids went to school, and let them know that the old rules of the neighborhood were dead. It was during this time that Bindy met Faisal Deen. Dean was a member of Los Diablos, a multi-ethnic street gang that handled the dirty work for the Dosanjhs. Bindy and Dean realized they were the ones doing the actual work, while the Dosanjhs took the lion's share of the profit. This planted the seed of the betrayal. Bindy began to resent the big shots who sat in their offices while he was on the front lines, dodging bullets. Around this time, the Dosanjhs were said to often refer to Bindy as a small-time operator, or a punk. For a man who felt he was the protector of his community and the smartest guy in the room, being called small-time by his own people was an insult he couldn't forgive. He wasn't just working for them anymore, he was studying their weaknesses, waiting for them to slip up. On March 14, 1991, a pivotal event in the history of organized crime took place in Vancouver, British Columbia. It served as a catalyst for the rise of one of Canada's most notorious gangsters. That gangster was Bindy Johal. It was the murder of a man named Teodoro Salcedo, a Colombian national, and someone who was allegedly a known drug trafficker. His death triggered a leadership vacuum that allowed younger, more violent factions to seize control of the local drug trade. Jimmy Dosanjh would eventually be arrested for the murder of Teodoro Salcedo. The power balance shifted. With the muscle of the organization behind bars, Bindy began to see his opening. The case was highly publicized, but ultimately resulted in an acquittal for Dosanjh. Despite the lack of a conviction, the period during which Jimmy Dosanjh was in custody awaiting trial changed the landscape of the Vancouver underworld. While Jimmy Dosanjh was in jail for the Salcedo case, his associate Bindy Johal took advantage of the leadership void. Johal began operating independently, hijacking drug shipments and establishing his own violent crew. This split is what led to a bloody feud between the Dosanjh brothers and Bindy Johal. During this era, various ethnic gangs were shifting alliances. Some reports link the hit on Salcedo to broader tensions between suppliers and local Vancouver distributors, particularly as younger gang members sought to cut out middlemen and increase their profit margins. You've been watching His Influence is Still Around, The Life of BC's Celebrity Gangster Bindy Johal, part of an ongoing investigative series from Sad Girl Productions. This documentary is based entirely on publicly available information, including archived news reports, court documents, and community sources. While every effort has been made to present this story accurately and respectfully, all events, statements, and accounts discussed in this video remain alleged unless otherwise verified through official records. The purpose of this series is to document, educate, and analyze criminal history, not to glorify, promote, or condemn any individuals or groups involved. Viewers are reminded that many of the details shared in this episode stem from a combination of media coverage which have not all been independently confirmed. Sad Girl Productions makes no claim of factual certainty regarding any individual's actions or involvement. All subjects discussed are presumed innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. Thank you for watching.